us this evening.
Hi, thank you for taking my call, Senator, and good evening. My question is about the immigrants coming across the border and being bused to not only New York, but other big states within the United States. What is being done to screen the people that are coming across that border instead of just letting everybody come in as a free-for-all? I understand you have some people that are coming for sanctuary, which is safety. You have some people that may be coming for the American dream. But I mean, all I can speak on is New York. We're busting at the seams. Where are all these people gonna go? I see people sleeping in the streets that are coming on those buses, and they're getting buses every day. Now programs are being cut because we can't afford the people that are coming across the border. And why don't they have a better screening process for the people that are coming across the border? Because we don't know these people's history. They could be pedophiles, they could be rapists. We just don't know. But with all of them coming in, now they want to cut pre-K, 4K. Our kids are suffering because we have nowhere to put these people. Kids got to go to school. And I really feel for them coming across the border. But what is being done to screen them and prioritize who gets in first?
Well, thank you so much, Evelyn, for your question. You bring up so many important elements to this, so I want to make sure that I'm answering as many components of your question as possible. So the first thing that I want to say is, which was first raised, which is the busing issue, which I think is a major issue, and it cuts to the core of one of the inequities that I've been certainly raising in Washington, and as well as many others. First and foremost, I agree that the busing issue is a major one that really cuts to a lack of fairness in terms of resources and distribution here. We are seeing a lot of municipalities, especially, we started seeing this in Texas, but frankly, we started to see it across the country, where people would just, where local leaders will just bus people to New York City. But here's the kicker with it. They would use federal resources. So they would take money from the federal government, and then they would keep some of those funds, which are intended for migrant relief, and then they would just buy a bus ticket and send people to New York. Now, that is not right. It's not fair. And if resources are going to go anywhere, it should be going to the municipalities that are actually doing the best job of caring for people. And so there's a fund. So the first issue here is a funding issue, because what's also happening is that you have members of Congress, you have a lot of Republicans, you have a lot of Democrats that want to send all of the money to just the border without recognizing that this issue, New York City is also a border city. When we talk about migration, we talk about visas, plenty of people cross the border, so to speak, at JFK Airport, at O'Hare in Chicago, and in LAX. And so it's really important that we talk about having actual equity in this funding here. So the first thing on that, we've actually advocated to remove federal funding for these municipalities that are just trying to shuttle people out in a very cynical manner, because that to me is not responsible. Secondly, there's actually really interesting is a really interesting fact around all of this too, is that there's all this political pressure that builds up around the border. And I want to explain how that translates into policy that does not help us, does not even help the migrant situation. And that is that every year they send billions and billions and billions of more dollars strictly to like actual border checkpoints on the southern US-Mexico border, which is actually not the central problem that we have here when we break all of this stuff down. In fact, we have authorized more money, and we have authorized such a high level of, for example, hires just to be deployed at the southern border, that at the end of the year, we can't even fill it. So we are allocating all of these resources and all of these positions that we can't even fill. So we're overfilling that in response to kind of a political football situation, but we are under-resourcing programs that are actually being used and needed, like what we're seeing here in the city. And so what's happening is that the cities and that the municipalities and places that are actually absorbing this operation are getting underfunded, but a lot of the militarization of our border is getting overfunded to the extent that they can't even spend it or they can't even fill the positions in time. And so the first thing that we need to explore here is a proper allocation of resources. And instead of overfunding one and creating all of this waste, because that's what's going on, waste, we are underfunding the other. And so we need to balance both of those things out. So that's issue number one. Now, question number two that you had, which is, how is the screening going on? What's going on with that, et cetera? Now, earlier this year, the Biden administration rolled out something known as CBP-1. And they actually really did tighten very, very severely a lot of the ability for people who are even seeking asylum to come across. They have to be pre-screened, and they go through an enormous amount of that screening that kicked in to a much higher gear several months ago. And we've actually seen that any sort of crime that may result, like when we look at what's happening at the Roosevelt Hotel, there are very few to almost no incidents that we see. It's extremely, extremely low. It is nowhere near what we see as average for a population. And so that screening is kicking into place. It kicked in through this thing known as the CBP-1 app. Now, I have certain concerns because there's facial recognition technology that I don't think is fully vetted or tested yet that's being deployed, but that's a separate issue. So that got kicked in there. But now, thirdly, I want to talk to you as well about, I think, the most important element to your question, which is what we are seeing play out on the city level, which is this idea from Mayor Adams that now we have to do across the board cuts on our services, on schools, on libraries, on summer youth employment in order to accommodate for this migrant, in order to accommodate for all of this migrant operation that the federal government is underfunding. Now, I want to speak to that directly because, to be very frank, I'm not sure if I believe those numbers. I'm not sure if these cuts are actually justified because the math, I don't believe that Mayor Adams has really shown his math to everyday people to actually see how this operation is meriting the severity of the cuts that he is proposing. When we've had this conversation with City Hall, a lot of this is about projections for the future. And it's much more rooted in those future projections than what we're actually seeing play out in the books. I am extremely concerned about these cuts to our libraries, which are unacceptable. All of these across the board cuts around all of our agencies. But at the same time, I'm not sure, I have not been convinced by these numbers that the migrant crisis covers 100% of what is going on here. I, you know, I think that one of the things that I've come out for is for more transparency around that, because the absolute last measure of resort should be cutting our public resources. That should not be, and it should never be, the go-to. We live in a city that is home to an enormous amount of the world's billionaires. We live in a city where if you look in Manhattan at night, half of those window lights are off because they are pied-à-terres for the globally wealthy, and they should be taxed. And if there are people who are buying their second, third, fourth pied-à-terre in Manhattan, and they don't even live here, and they're contributing to gentrification and displacement and the housing crisis, and they're not even being hit to contribute to our tax base, then that should be what is looked at first in order to balance our books. It shouldn't be cutting our teachers. It shouldn't be cutting our schools. It shouldn't be cutting our library access. And if we actually kind of look at this conversation, I have not seen, frankly, that solution even be entertained. And so my first question is, why is the only conversation in the room cuts? And why is there no conversation about revenue raising? And now you might hear some people say, well, it's because we're going to push the wealthy out of New York City and they're going to move out. We have actually seen that the data does not support that. There have been people who move out of New York City, but guess what? The people who are moving out of the city are not by and large the wealthiest people. They're the working class that can't afford to live here anymore. And so, to me, I completely understand the situation, and it's not to dismiss what's going on. I have been advocating an enormous amount for continued and elevated resources, having the Biden administration step up in what they're giving, not just to New York City, but to other places like Chicago, LA, et cetera, so that we can do what we do as a city of immigrants. And to date, we've brought in over $145 million from the federal government to help contribute to that pot. But I think that as someone that's watching these numbers play out, I think that if we are going to see City Hall and if we're going to see folks demand such severe cuts, they need to show their math down to the penny, because not one kid in this city should have $1 less than they deserve because someone didn't do the math right. And I'm concerned that there has not been an actual accounting of that. And I am very concerned that we are using the migrant issue to throw them as just a scapegoat for what is actually perhaps budgetary planning that hasn't dotted all its I's and crossed its T's. I don't know. But what I do think that we can all ask for is for the numbers to be shown. And if the numbers show that this is causing, then this is dollar for dollar, then I think we can discuss what our alternatives are. But, I just don't think that even if you completely shut down this entire operation, I still don't think that justifies dollar for dollar these draconian cuts that are just being kind of announced all of a sudden. And so, that's where I'm at on all of this. I think we can advocate for more transparency on that, because I'm in complete agreement. There is no way, shape, or form in which our cuts to our public services, essential public services, like our libraries, our schools, our healthcare, our housing, is acceptable. Not now, and it's not something that I'm willing to sacrifice.